Welcome to Belief Busters podcast, where we change the world one belief at a time. I'm your host, Reverend Cherie Taylor Jones, and I'm really glad that you could join us on the journey. Welcome to another episode of Belief Busters. And today I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to have. Really taking a look at where do our beliefs about religion come from, and also looking at spiritual gifts. What are they? So to join me on this juicy conversation today, we have Jock Brocas. Welcome, Jock.
Thank you. As I've never been introduced as having a juicy conversation, so I'm looking forward to that. If it carries on the way that we started, we'll be good. We'll be in good hands. It's lovely to be with you, Cherie.
Thank you. Would you tell our audience a little bit about who you are?
I am an author. I'm a paranormal researcher. I am an evidential medium. I've developed over many years. I'm the author of a book called Deadly Departed, The Do's, Don'ts and Dangers of the Afterlife, which was a groundbreaking study, really, a groundbreaking handbook into grief, the afterlife, and people dabbling in things they shouldn't do, and religion and all sorts of things. I'm also a coach, so I help coach people in various aspects, leaders, executives, lawyers in their business, and also in their spirituality. So I have two distinct hats, if you like. So I kind of wear both hats. I have lots of hats. I'm an entrepreneur as well. I develop online programs and softwares and things like that. So yes, I have many hats, but I'm very passionate about spiritual growth, self-development, and serving people who are suffering through spiritual subjugation, or even in grief in many different ways. So that's where I am at the moment.
When we first connected, I thought that it would be really juicy to look at so many different topics. Like we could talk about religion, we could talk about your history, because my history is also Catholicism. So when you mentioned that, I was like, ding! And and then, the title of your book just sounds like we could do, like several hour conversations. Let's start with, you grew up Catholic. And then how did your journey, because my experience of Catholicism is very rigid, very rules-based, no woo-woo, no spiritual gifts. And so how did you get from being raised Catholic to where you are at this point? What was that journey like?
It's fascinating, and we're going to jump back to that woo-woo side of things, because we'll come off of that and come back, because I can prove a natural spiritual gifts has been a part of the Catholic faith for many years, even since the early 12th century. So my upbringing, I was born and raised Roman Catholic. And the interesting thing is I was very spiritual from a young age, from as far back as I can even remember. I think the earliest recollection I have of anything remotely religious or spiritual was when my uncle Tom, who was a monk, he was called Brother Magella, and he was in the Redemptorist order. He would put me on top of a table in front of everybody, at the age of, I don't know, 4 or 5 or something like that, and teach me to pray the rosary and to pray and stuff, Okay. And interestingly, the first thing that I remember, my mother recollected this many times, and it kind of goes into how the Roman Catholic Church, or even in any religion, tends to put down who we are. I would say a prayer, and I would say, pray for me, mother, a poor sinner, and absolutely throw myself under the bus, like everything I do is a sin. And I think from that recollection, I think things started to kind of tweak with me. But of course, most of my school years, I was going on religious retreats. So while people were going on holidays and adventure holidays, I actually went to the monastery, and I lived with the monks and nuns that were visiting, and people that were on religious retreats. And when I was old enough, I joined, it's like an organization, like a junior seminary, and go through all that. I wanted to become a priest, and I had a very steeped idea of what the Catholic faith was. But at the same time, I had a lot of spiritual experiences that I had to question, that didn't sit well in catechism, or it didn't sit well with the rule book, so to speak.
Like what?
And just like I would witness that. I'd have intuitive expressions of things. I would know certain things that other people wouldn't, you know. The Catholic Church will say one of those things is a sign of demonic possession, and we can get into that a bit later. But I had those experiences, and I would see things, I would witness certain things, you know. And when we were kind of going through the junior seminary type of stuff, or the organization for people that wanted to go into a vocation, all the other kids were like, they were in it, young boys and stuff. They would go out and kneel in front of the cross, and they would say they'd have massive visions, and they spoke to Jesus and everything. And I felt really kind of annoyed about that. You know, I was like, well, hang on, I haven't had that. Go on the knees, and I'd sit there and I'd bring out my rosary and I'd pray, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'm ready. You know, show me something, and not see nothing. And I couldn't understand it. I'm like, these guys are constantly saying they're seeing things and hearing things, and what I was seeing and hearing was completely, to me, I thought was normal, but they weren't experiencing it. And so I then began to question even deeper. Like it then started thinking, they're just making this up. There's no way that they'd have. Why would Jesus just appear to them when you know, or Padre Pio would appear to them? And then of course you have the people who say, well, you know, anybody. You can appear to anybody who's in need and stuff like that. But I knew most of it was made up. So it kind of set me on a path of trying to understand things even deeper.
What do you think about religion? Have you been able to stay on a spiritual journey, a spiritual path? Where are you now as far as your beliefs go?
Do you know, I see there's good in every single religion, and I'm lucky to I've studied everything from Buddhism, Mormonism, everything that you can imagine, and had a look at them all in different respects. And Buddhism I don't see as a religion, I see it as a philosophy. Even I've prayed in mosques, I've prayed in synagogues, so I think everything has an underlying good quality to it. The problem is that man makes it something negative. If we look at even the Quran and the Bible and the Talmud and all those different texts, even back to the Book of Raziel and things like that, we see that there's underlying parallel currents.
Absolutely.
That we've just labeled differently.
Yeah.
So I tend then my spiritual outlook is acceptance of everything, but living by what I like to term my divine authority, my spiritual authority. And I like to think, and your listeners may kind of disagree with me, but I think spirituality is different to religion. I think religion has a rule book, and religion has dogmatic ways of belief, and that belief is governed by other people's perceptions. And you and I spoke about this when we first spoke.
Right.
What was quite exciting, you know. While we have an undercurrent of religion that is good, the perception of man changes its outlook. And then therefore the perception of man causes the division. Man causes their own division. We have in the world barriers all over. You know, look at immigration, look at people in the world. We have to realize that we're only caretakers of this earth, this world. We don't own it. God in his infinite wisdom, the universe, they own it. That's so why are we creating barriers from man? And it's man's perception, and it's man's thirst for power and greed. And you know, it's you're supposed to, in every scripture that's out there, there's abundance for everybody, but man makes more lack than anything.
Correct.
And we don't. Every single religion has an underlying truth, and I believe it's love, forgiveness, and compassion. But even to this day, in 2020, going into 2021, many of us are still struggling to actually recognize that and to try and live by that rule book, if you like, love, forgiveness, that divine law, if you like, that's what I prefer to call it, of love, forgiveness, and compassion. 3 simple tenets of life that you would think we would get. And over thousands and thousands and thousands of years in wars and turmoil, we still don't get it. We say it glibly because it's just 3 words. But in essence, it's the animating force of all that exists.
Yeah. Of the divine nature of the Christ
Absolutely.
consciousness. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think our listeners wouldn't be surprised by those thoughts. We do look at spirituality, that there are many paths to God, and ours is to figure out how do we get that kind of connection where we're constantly in that resonance of love, and so that then we can act out into the world from our divine nature. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's our foundation here. So I agree with you. And I know when I say to people being irreverent, and I say that religion is mansplaining, I often get those kind of, what did she just say? Did she really just say that? I agree with you from the perspective of religion is based on the consciousness at the time that they write those sacred texts.
Absolutely. Well, if you think about it, let's go into mediumship and let's go into spiritual gifts. And I said in my book that many, many years ago in the ancient temples in Jerusalem, the ancient temples of Egypt and things like that, it was mediums and trance mediums that actually brought forth that information. And they ran the temples of the day. And they were then basically turned upon by the government of the day, the political power of the day. And so if we look back at all these ancient texts, even modern texts like Mormonism and things like that, if we go back to Revelation, if we go in the Bible, I'm probably going to have Christians who are going to try and crucify me now, but if we go back to certain books in the Bible as well, and John and Matthew and things like that, we can actually see that all that knowledge came from spiritual gifts. It came from clairvoyance, clairaudience, the expression of spirit animating in the material world. All of this information came from spiritual gifts. We decided to change it. We decided to put imposition on it. And we decided to change the direction of what it was. Jesus never came down to teach Christianity, and anybody who believes that is totally wrong. Christianity started with St. Paul on the road to Damascus, which he heard clairaudiently. He heard things. So we have an underlying aspect of spiritual gifts in early Bible. And you look at Moses seeing the stone tablets, clairvoyantly witnessing the burn. Did I think there was a burning bush there? Absolutely not. But I think he clairvoyantly maybe saw something either subjectively or objectively. And that objectification, he was able to then, build that story and that kind of thing. So we have examples of that. We have examples of it in the Quran. We have examples of that in the Talmud. In Judaism, we have all that kind of stuff as well. And if we then go back into ancient cultures and American Indians, same gifts. Same gifts of the spirit. Every single person in the world has spiritual gifts. Some people have it stronger than others. There is no rule and regulation of who gets a spiritual gift and who doesn't. And so it's a bit kind of naive for the powers of the day to turn around and say that these things don't exist. And this is put under lock and key, which, kind of makes a nice segue back into Catholicism, because Catholicism, if we look back at the Didache in the 12th century, I'm positive it was the 12th century, I could be wrong, but 12th century, we see that in some of that text, they talk about spiritual gifts. They also talk about divination and witchcraft and things like that. And yes, there's a negative side to it. If there was no bad, there was no evil, good would have no label. We would be in a permanent state of grace, and we would not know any different. Therefore, there would be no growth. Kind of need it in order for us to grow, which is a bit weird and probably frightening for people to think of. But
no, I don't think it's weird. I think
makes us grow.
Darkness is part of allness. If we say that God is all things, then darkness is part of the divine nature as well. And it's humanity's need to suppress that darkness that creates the amount and depth of negativity that we see in the world. You know, once we start labeling something as good, and we all want to be good, then whatever we label as bad, we suppress and try to get rid of. And
And
all
it
of
helps us
that,
grow.
right, and all of that, the darkness and the light, are necessary for us to evolve in consciousness, for us to learn the
Absolutely.
lessons that we're here to learn, for us to grow in spirituality. Now, when you talk about spiritual gifts, would you go into a little bit more detail about what those spiritual gifts are? Like, I know you mentioned clairaudience and
Yeah,
clairsentience, so
absolutely.
can you just define them a little bit for us?
Sure. So we have called claircognizance, which is the highest form of spiritual gift. And if you think, if an easy example of claircognizance would be Jesus Christ being is, and I'm not taking away the fact that he was a son of God or anything else like that. What I'm saying is that he had spiritual gifts bestowed upon him to and just a natural, inordinate level, and he knew things. So he just had known of everything, the laws of the universe, everything, and that's what we deem as clear cognizance.
Okay.
And if we work between claircognizance and then clairvoyance, clairvoyance is the gift of seeing. It's the gift I like to, it's the ability to see spiritual things. And there's in every aspect of spiritual gifts, there's two different dimensions that we think about, that we know about. One is the objective dimension, and one is the subjective. So we look at things objectively means that we see it within the material world with our physical attributes. But the interesting thing is that everything that we experience in the world, be it a spiritual experience or external to that, we actually feel everything internal. Everything we feel internal.
Mhm.
Nothing is external to us. Because when we see something, the vision is within side of us in the eyes, and everything comes
Absolutely.
inside. The pain that we feel if we hurt our knee, we feel in the inside. So life is an internal experience. And when we realize that, we can develop things differently. So in clairvoyance, then you would have that objective and the subjective, and the subjective would be understood as seeing in the mind's
Mhm.
eye, is what people would think of the third eye, or people would think of different chakras and things like that. So that's your clairvoyance side of things. And then your clairaudience, again, subjective and objective, would be hearing external to you, would be objective, and maybe hearing the voice of or a disembodied voice or a spirit voice, something like that, where you're able to decipher it with your physical attributes. You
Right,
can hear it with your auditory nerves and your your ear.
right.
And then obviously clairaudience subjectively, I'm hearing in my mind. And the easiest way that I can teach anyone to say that is to pick up a book and just to read it in their mind. And that's subjective clairaudience. The difference is when you're developing that ability is that you will be discerning between the different energy, and that energy will have its own signature, and therefore you can deduce whether it is external, whether it's your mind, yourself, your ego, or whether it's coming from a spiritual source. And that takes many, many, many years of
Right.
development. And then, of course, clairsentience is the same of subjective objectives, is feeling, feeling, having a feeling inside you, a feeling outside you. You can actually feel the pain of, maybe if I was sitting with someone who was grieving, who maybe lost someone to a shooting or something like that,
Mhm.
I could feel that in my body and actually feel the physical pain. Whereas before, I'll give you an example.
Yes.
Many, many years ago in Scotland, I was doing a reading for a woman who had lost her sons, and the son, they were rushing, and so it was going really well. I mean, the evidence was coming through; it was great, but there was an aspect of it that was very difficult for them for her to try and understand. So they actually physically made my nose bleed,
Wow.
so that she could remember back to the situation when she found her son.
Okay.
So that's like a physical aspect of it. Yes, it doesn't happen a lot, and I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't want anybody to have it, but that's just an example there. And then the internal feeling would be, people think it's just a feeling inside of them, but it's not actually. It's the internal of a subjective clairsentience is actually, and this is my own opinion, there's a combination of clairvoyance and feelings inside, because when you feel that pain or something inside of you, or you have an idea that you're feeling that emotion, it often follows immediately with a clairvoyant image so that you can put it together. So I think the two of them are genuinely combined.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you've got, clairolfactance and smell and that kind of stuff. And that goes right into the deep aspects of it. But the point is that we all have these abilities. Some people can sing beautifully, and some people can't hold a note in a bucket, but they can still sing, you know?
Yeah.
Some people will, and here's the thing. I recently did a video. I haven't launched it on my YouTube channel yet, because I just did a video on, people used to ask me recently, how can I become a medium really quickly? And that's a really bad thing to ask, especially me. And I like to liken it to when you're learning the piano, you eventually, you aspire to maybe be the next Bach or Beethoven or Mendelssohn or something like that. Mm-hmm. But you don't immediately sit down and become an expert.
Right.
You learn to read the music. You learn to feel the music. You learn to see the music. You learn through, a lot of development to put the notes together, to understand the vibration and the harmony and how that all, and so that's what it's like for mediumship. You have to develop before you can play that symphony. Everybody can sit and plunk a tune if you show them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean to say they're going to be able to play Bach's,
right,
unfinished symphony or something.
Sure. So we have listeners that have been conditioned through various aspects of religion that these spiritual gifts are negative. Mm-hmm. And as we are evolving now in consciousness and in our spiritual nature, how do you suggest that people go about really allowing their gifts to bubble up and for them to express them? How do you help them discern what those are as well?
There's a great thing that I would like to say before I tell them how to recognize it, is I wrote an article for Paranormal Daily News, which was entitled "The Catholic Church Supports Mediums," because in every religion you'll have people who say this is evil, that's evil. What you're doing is evil. It's witchcraft and everything else. But then you have a complete reversal and turnaround by someone like the Pope of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, Pope John Paul. They all, if we look at Vatican II changed, and then they released information. I can't remember exact document, but it's written in that article, where they said, don't turn away anybody that has spiritual gifts. But as long as they're Catholic, which is crazy, as long as they're Catholic, we can accept the fact that they have spiritual gifts and we can utilize them. So if you look at that example, that shows you that most religions are completely wrong in their perceptions or their belief. And I like to term this, Cherie, as if you believe in something, you actually disbelieve it. Why? Because if you believe in something, you're believing in someone else's perception. But if you know something, that is divine. There is no in between. When you know something in your spirit, your soul, and your heart, that is the epitome of what divine energy, what the divine is. But when you believe in something, you're believing in someone else's perception. So I never say, many people have said to me, do you believe in the afterlife? And I say, absolutely not. I know there's an afterlife. There's a big difference. So when people are talking about they have gifts, and I have a lot of people that come to me and say, I think I have a gift. I think I'm going to be a medium. I'm like, well, slow down. Just because you've experienced some things doesn't mean to say that you're going to be a medium. There's a whole gamut that goes into that, and it's not an easy path, and there's a great deal of sacrifice that goes into it. But everybody has a spiritual gift, and if I can get you to accept your gift, then you can develop that to help you in your life. Everybody has intuition. We all have, you could be sitting on your chair, so I'm sure you've experienced this loads of times. You're sitting on your chair, and you think of your friend, and boom, the phone goes. Sure. So you're picking up that intuitive energy, that thought, or you're perhaps you're going on a journey, and let's take back to, I hate to bring this up, but it's a great example. 9/11, when 9/11 happened,
Mm-hmm.
so many people survived, and God bless those that we lost, but so many people survived because their intuition kicked into overdrive. And there is many examples, even in parapsychology literature and in research papers, where the individual had just an overwhelming sense of doom, or they lost their, losing things, or they misplaced things. There's an element where their sixth sense, their intuition, their spiritual gifts, or their connection with those on the other side was able to intervene at that time. And the way that I like to tell someone to start to understand their gifts, I have a quote on my website. I have a quote, and I can't remember it word for word. It was many, many years ago. And it was actually based on myself. And I was basically doing like a mindfulness meditation in Inverness in Scotland, in Loch Ness. And it was a little wooded area that I was walking around near Beaulieu. And there's a certain place that sits by just a running brook, a little running waterfall that comes down, and it's beautiful. And I decided to sit there and meditate. This particular day, I just said one thing, and I asked God. I said, "Talk to me," and I kind of heard nothing. And then all of a sudden, I felt this amazing energy come over me as I went deeper. And that's where the quote came from. The quote kind of goes, "Talk to me," I asked God. And God responded, "I am here. Can't you hear me? I am in the breeze that passes through. I am in the water that passes by," and then so on and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me, the very seed and root of where our spiritual gifts come from is the recognition and understanding that it is not separate to us, that it is part of us.
Yes.
And that energy exists in all things. And once we recognize that, then we can go on to start discerning the different aspects of it.
Right. So what we're talking about is looking at a belief that we may hold about spiritual gifts and reframing them, making a choice to look at where did we get the belief that spiritual gifts are a no-no or woo-woo or not of God, assessing them, seeing if that's really holding true for who we are as divine human beings. And then if that really doesn't resonate anymore, we now have the choice to release that belief that doesn't serve us, and now breathe life into how do we create a new belief around spiritual gifts. And what you just gave us, Jock, was the new belief about spiritual gifts, that where do they come from? They come from God. They come from allness. They come from source. Once we're able to give ourselves that freedom to know that the spiritual gifts are of God, then that, I think, breaks open our psyche, our emotions, our spirituality, our consciousness, to then be able to discern what are those spiritual gifts.
I think a great question to ask oneself is, who does the belief serve? If the belief serves the religion, then you can be sure that it's not coming from that higher. It is coming from man's ego, man's perception.
Yes.
If the belief serves the politics of the day, which is a lot of the things that happened way back in the early centuries, even before Christ, when the belief serves the politics of the day, and the politics serves a belief, then that is not rooted in divinity.
Right.
That is rooted in man's perceptions. And I think if we ask ourselves, where did this belief begin and who does it serve? Because the reality is that your experience of the divine, your experience of nature in its entirety, and your knowingness and your feeling of everything around you and being a part of every experience around you will certainly go against the grain of what other man's belief systems are. because then you're getting to the point where you are becoming and recognizing that you are part of that animating force that exists in everything.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Ask
powerful.
questions. That's what we need to do. Keep asking.
Yes. Yes. And what you talked about in the early days about religion serving the politics of the day. I mean, we can see that being replicated today, even in the
Absolutely.
US, right? The question still stands today of, you know, is that belief serving the politics of the day or the religion, or is the belief from source, from God, from divinity?
Absolutely.
Is it creating a
Who does
world?
it serve?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's very simple. It's simple for any of your listeners out there. Anything that you're faced with on the news, on anywhere else, just go inside. Who, what, who, why, what does this belief serve?
So, would you tell our listeners how to get in contact with you and exactly how they can work with you?
Absolutely. I have the best way to get in contact with me if you've got any questions on spirituality is actually on my Instagram, because yes, I have a website, it's jockbrocas.com. I have several websites. I'm on YouTube, and you can find me in Jock Brocas Spiritual Medium, Evidential Medium on YouTube. But I find a lot of people have a lot of questions, and so they connect with me on Instagram. They send me a question. I don't always get back straight away, but actually 9 times out of 10, I respond to every single person, either by video response or audio response. And I'm happy to share knowledge and wisdom with anyone. Anyone who's got a question, I will try and help as much as I can. I have 84 lessons on YouTube on everything from the afterlife to the paranormal to demonology to spiritual growth, and I give it freely for everyone to learn, and it's helped many, many people. So, but if you want to connect with me instantly, you want to connect with me directly, then at Spiritual Medium on Instagram is where you'll get a faster response.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Unbelief Busters. See you next time on the flip side. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of belief systems. I hope this gives you permission to change your beliefs and subsequently the world. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast and leave a review wherever you listen. You can reach me at info@preachitsister.com. I've also written a book, Turning Your Why into Why Not, that gives you practical resources and steps that you can take to continue on the journey of exploring what your belief systems are. I look forward to seeing you next time on Belief Busters Podcast. See you on the flip side.